welcome to the 2020 Brain and Transcranial Photobiomodulation Virtual Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Doduro, and my guest is Mika Shanser. He's a human optimization through tech and nature. That's kind of his thing. He's passionate about helping people achieve optimal human performance in all areas of their lives, otherwise known as the concept of peak performance or flow state. His background in working with at-risk youth in residential wilderness settings led him to build his career in neurofeedback and neuromodulation that he applies to develop tactics that support optimal human performance. He's board certified in neurofeedback. He holds a master's degree in wilderness therapy, and he's currently researching more effective ways to support people to live their best lives. He is an accomplished big mountain telemark skiing. That's cross-country skiing down the hill. He's competed in New Zealand, in the New Zealand Free Ride Championships and across the continent and internationally. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the program, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, I mean, you that's kind of risky taking, isn't it? This downhill rapid skiing without the binding on the back.
Yeah, I mean, everything has risk. And then, as we'll talk about with the concept of flow, we also have something called the challenge ratio. So the whole idea is that we're pushing ourselves to maximize performance, but never so far out that we're actually getting too injured, which I'm very, very injured from from not knowing my limits or not.
There you go.
Yeah, but that's the whole idea, right? Of like maximizing flow is actually not pushing too hard or too far.
So we talk about, what's that, what does the flow? Hormesis, right? Hormesis at the top. Then there's uresis and dysuresis, something like that when you're destroying, right? So not enough. It's like the Goldilocks effect, right? That's what you're shooting for. And
and I mean, that's anytime we use like that term peak performance, we're going to have that idea of like, if you're peaking, there's going to be a valley in the end. And if we look at something as a cycle, we can actually support the whole cycle to minimize our time in recovery or struggle and actually maximize our time on that peak.
So people who want to, like I said, people who want to have peak performance, you can have it as they want to have peak mental performance, peak emotional performance, peak cardiovascular performance. I mean, it's a different idea. There's health, there's fitness, and then there's performance. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You follow? Does that fit in your model, or is that outside the box?
No, that's totally right there. I mean, everyone's, we all share the same physiology. So we're all going to respond relatively in the same way to stress, right? Maybe it's somebody it's cold hands, maybe somebody it's rapid breathing. There's these simple things that we can look at, say, through biofeedback and figure out how to stabilize somebody. And that's going to work across mental performance or sports performance, and once we have a nice baseline or routine or practice, we can actually start to optimize it.
And optimize. So how does this, like I'm going to say, how does this work with, what is an at-risk youth? I mean, I'm not that, but I guess they used to call them pains in the ass when I was a kid.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's so the majority of my career was taking court-ordered kids or kids in crisis who have been kicked out of schools, lots of wealthier families as well, into the woods for, I'd say the average shift I worked was 10 days to 30 days. So being out in the woods with, a counselor, at least one program, and then other guides and working kids through different rites of passage or wilderness survival skills, emotional intelligence, kind of general assessment and stabilization from a more clinical model.
That's cool. That
was the best, man.
Kind of reminds me of all the shamanic passages and the what is the cultural thing? Remember?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that, but I saw it on Roots. Watched Roots, and that's why they had this. Now you are a man. Like the circumcision, all these things. These were processes of passage that we sort of kind of have washed away in our.
Yeah, well, I'm proud to say we didn't do any circumcisions while we were guiding, but we did do a lot of rites of passage. We even did cord cutting ceremonies between the mom and the child. we used to do some hunting as a rite of passage. So looking at the initiatory aspect of hunting for your own food. So yeah, lots of fun.
And there was some struggle. I mean, someone had to be in control, right? Because they had to get a little bit cold. They had to get a little bit hungry, I would suppose, right?
I mean, Tom Brown, if you guys are familiar with him, he's a pretty famous tracker back east in New Jersey. He's in his book, The Tracker, fantastic read. He writes about that exact experience as your ticket of admission, right?
Ticket
it's like that.
of admission.
Yeah, it's like, and for anyone that's been out bird watching or hunting or, seen an amazing rainbow on top of a mountain, well, that rainbow implied that there was rain, right? So it's at some point we got a little cold, we got a little tired, we got a little wet, and that's okay, right? We can breathe through it, relax into it, and there's actually, a wonderful experience to be had.
I like that. And so there's also those, I'm going to talk, maybe you're going to talk about the nature giving you that awe-inspiring, like you talked about, seeing something, that sense of awe is a shared experience, Mm-hmm. Everybody that goes and looks at the eclipse, they all go like that, right? So you were bringing those, that's kind of the flow state too, right? Awe,
mm-hmm.
Moment of awe.
Yeah. I mean, 100, that's the, we'll get into kind of the mechanics of the flow state, but certainly that awe to me implies gratitude. It implies connection to self, connection to place, maybe connection to other, right? When we're looking at the stars, and I've had the privilege of some kids that have come from, say, New York City and have never seen the stars at least in the same way that you see it when you're in the middle of a desert with, no major cities within, say, 100 miles. And there's a sense of your place in the cosmos, a sense of, smallness that can come with that.
Yeah. So you went from the process of being a wilderness counselor, you like to be outside, like to go down the hill, and how did transcranial photobiomodulation kick in? Where did you make that transition? How did I make the connection? Because, like educate, learn us.
Yeah, I mean, so short story long, basically, I was doing a master's degree in wilderness therapy, and my actual I used to do some ski mountaineering racing, and my race partner had worked with a neurofeedback practitioner, and ended up doing my internship in neurofeedback. So I was actually initially planning on going back and guiding at a program that I had helped start for wilderness therapy in Washington State. Ended up doing neurofeedback, and then I was at ISNR, and really Marvin Berman would be the kind of the link to me using Violite, and then looking at just kind of the general, just a different way of doing neurofeedback.
Doing what you're doing. I can't wait to hear it. I mean, hey, you're one thing that you learn to be a wilderness guy is you got to be adaptive, right?
Yeah, of course.
You get the tools, and so I bet you'd MacGyvered a bunch of this brain stuff. So I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, we'll see the setup in the back of the truck, and I mean, really for me, having a background and also teaching, kind of for those of you that are familiar with Tom Brown and the deep nature connection, primitive skills movement, having taught in those schools as well, there's been this tension that I've been trying to navigate and figure out just for myself of staring in front of multiple screens all day, looking at brainwaves versus, connecting in with nature. So we're pretty proud of our new company, Restorative Adventures, where we're doing wilderness-based work that's actually integrating photobiomodulation or other neuromodulation tactics so that we can actually enhance or let's say disrupt whatever patterns going on in the brain and be able to get faster results. Because whether we like it or not, our world happens at quite a fast rate. And if we can learn how to slow down and get into a flow state effectively, we can actually, keep up with whatever we need to be keeping up with.
That's great. I can't wait to see the pictures of Marvin on Survivor,
Oh man. Yeah, that'll be great.
I think I got the video. It's going to come in the next one. So yeah, let's go to your slides. What do you say?
Sounds great.
So flow hacking, the use of transcranial photobiomodulation to enter flow. I'm on the edge of my seat. Go.
Right on. Me too. Wait, can you do my presentation for me though?
No, I'm just going to be the guy I'm the pain in the ass that raises his hand in class. So go ahead.
So here we go. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the term flow. We can also call it being in the zone, being it in the pocket. It's had a lot of different names. By no means is it a modern concept. However, our understanding of brain physiology has helped us to understand what's actually happening and, given us some tools to be able to recreate it. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is adopted from the book Flow by this gentleman, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And then a lot, actually, the book behind it, Rise of the Superhuman, or Superman, Stephen Kotler's work as well. So there's lots going on in terms of just the lineage here of what's happening. But simply put, flow is where we, excuse me, flow is when we feel our best and perform our best. It drives our attention into now. And what I really love is that anyone can enter flow. There's, for those of you that follow our podcast, I did one with Jeremy Jensen, I think 2 weeks ago. And we talked about this idea that you can be the person double backflipping off a cliff and getting into flow, or you can be entering flow because you're really into your needlepoint, right? So there's this idea that, whatever you're doing, there's a way to enter flow. So this here is a picture of the now deceased Shane McConkey, who I think is, in my mind, one of the greater flow hackers and innovators in big mountain skiing. And so this is him ski basing. So he would ski down a mountain, jump off the mountain, do a couple backflips, and then pop his skis off and pull a parachute. For those of you familiar with him, that is actually how he died. But there's a way, there's a longer story in that of like him being so in flow that even in that accident, up until he hit the ground, he was actually working on getting his skis off. So he just, there was arguably no moments of panic, right? He's just so in that moment. But just, for us to remember that most people actually get into flow by learning and doing work, right? So this is not
doing work. I like that.
Yeah. So, if you're familiar with the idea of deep work, was that Cal Newport who wrote Deep Work, or one of, there's so many of these books these days, but this idea of really, really diving in and really mastering a craft or creating something, that's the most common way, getting lost in a book. So, so as we talked about, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is maybe the grandfather of modern day flow. He defines it as being completely involved in any activity for its own sake. Time flies, the ego falls away. Every moment in thought flow inevitably from the previous one. Your whole being is involved, and you are performing your skill to its uttermost. Right. And if you just to denote once again, like this is something that can come from, just like I said, reading the book or jumping off the cliff. And I really just want to debunk that piece of like, we have to be jumping out of an airplane. That is a super effective way to get into flow, right? It's going to really drop you into it quickly. Please have a parachute for those of you listening and have an airplane. But yeah, there's tons of different ways to do it.
But people are trying to evoke it. They're trying to evoke that instead of create it. You know what I'm trying to say? Is that correct?
I'd say it's a bit of both, right? I think there's an evoking and there's something called the challenge ratio, which we alluded to earlier, which is where we're looking at being about 4% outside of our comfort zone. So if you're wanting to learn how to ski, or maybe you just learned how to do a jump, maybe your next is to do a grab or to do a spread eagle, and then a 180 and then a 360. But going from your first jump to a backflip is a bit too far of a jump, right? So there's different ways that we can evoke it, whether it's, music or there's different flow triggers. So it gets quite nuanced, but there's different ways, even for work, having clear goals and having short-term and long-term consequences is one of the flow hacks for that. So if we get into this chart, I don't know if people can they see all the words with the right on. So there's 4 phases of flow, or 4 stages of flow. We go from struggle to release to flow to recovery. Most people I work with, struggle and recovery are the 2 things they're weakest with, right? So if we look at the struggle, this is that part where you're, you're like, oh, I got to get this email sent, or I got to start working on my book. I got to get out the door and go for a run. And it's just hard. Right. And we can build systems here. We can build systems of, all right, my running clothes are already set out. I'm just going to go out the door for 2 minutes, or I'm going to lock myself out of all my distractions on my computer. And I'm just going to write for 5 minutes, even if it sucks and I have to delete everything. Right. So that's that struggle phase. The release phase, which is where we're going to kind of tune into some of the photobiomodulation piece, especially with the nitric oxide. This is where we're flushing the stress hormones. So if you have ever had an epiphany in the shower, you're out, you're trying to come up with some complex solution, or you're trying to just get something worded right. And then all of a sudden you're out walking the dog, taking a shower, half asleep, kind of in this liminal space. That's the release phase. So we're going to have alpha waves are going to increase. Nitric oxide is going to be flushing our cortisol, right? We're getting into this nice calm spot. And that's ultimately what leads us into flow. So within flow, we're going to have, they talk about it as being an alpha theta border. I've read some stuff more and more about it, waking theta or waking delta states even. I really, just to kind of note, and I'm going to hit on this more a little, I guess I'll just hit on it now. This idea of the Schumann resonance, or the resonant frequency of the earth, right? That's 7.8 hertz roughly. It's always changing. But that border right in there is right where we're hitting flow. So it's more of just a personal musing to say that, something going on that as we're connecting, with ourselves, with the earth, we're actually getting into flow. And then when we go through that, we're actually burning through a lot of our fuel, and then we have to get back into recovery, right? So this is where we're actually sleeping. We can use tools like active recovery, like, rolling something out, hot and cold immersion, sleep. The thing that we all think we don't need to do is super valuable here. And then that pattern goes continuously. But if you can imagine, if you're most of us, in this highly distracted world, right? We have smartphone and we have like banners and we have everything just constantly notifying us. It's really hard to get through the struggle phase because we're constantly we're constantly getting distracted. So when we're struggling, or when we're trying to achieve this experience of deep work or flow, we actually really need to be able to push through and stay focused so we can relax and release.
I think, right. So this is amazing. I love this. So I kind of think what the opposite of flow is, like getting in your own way. Right?
Yeah.
So
total. I mean, I see the opposite of flow as being the struggle, but I'm almost moving towards it being distraction, right? Like,
I think that's cool. Yeah, that's probably a good one.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most challenging. We're so inundated with information that's not leading us towards actually what our real goals are, and we're not able to tolerate maybe the boredom or the discomfort or the anxiety of whatever work we're trying to do. And that might be an indication that our goal is too lofty or not lofty enough, right? There might be some questions of like, hey, where are we going and why? And then I think, we do a lot of work with Dr. Tarrant in the Neuro Meditation Institute. And one of the 4 styles of meditation, there's actually the 5th is deep states or flow. But one of the 4 styles that we use in terms of guiding people through mindfulness is focus, which is going to increase beta and gamma in the brain. So for a lot of us that have this,
focus is beta, theta, and gamma. Focus
is going to be beta and gamma.
Beta and gamma. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to be speeding up the brain. Really beta for between 16 and 20 hertz. So a beta 2. And what I'm seeing with a lot of people is they don't actually have the focus to even push through the struggle phase. So we're spending our whole working life just kind of stuck in struggle. Right? We're just like, oh man, like I never really got in the zone on that bike ride. I just, maybe I'm pushing too hard. I just started on a climb. I didn't warm up. My nutrition sucked. I wasn't rested. There's all these, somewhere between excuses and causal experiences of like, all right, well, if we start prepping for the ride the day before, we start prepping for the work the day before, just like we start prepping for sleep first thing in the morning by exposing ourselves to light. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I really see a big piece is that struggle phase.
So let me, you're talking to a guy who's not like follow all the different betas and everything there. But so what you're saying is sometimes the focus is to go a little bit higher, like a gamma, like a 40, 50, 60 hertz type of thing, to blow out of that beta, so that you're going to come back down to something a little slower like the alpha, and then you're going into this. This is the theta gamma ratio that you're looking at flow there. Is that what that is, or just theta? What is that?
So gamma typically is going to burst in the brain. It's something that we don't understand as well as other brain waves. There's a lot of reasons for that, but theta is kind of this creative waking state. It's where empathy and connection can come from. And typically, like when we think about, you're thinking of the theta to beta ratio. And when we think about that, that's actually one of the neural signatures for ADHD, having excess theta and, not enough beta. So you're zoned out, your brain's not engaging. But there's a way, and we're going to get into a little bit more here too, of like some ideas of transient hypofrontality and gamma bursts that come with this. So gamma is not the steady state during flow. Gamma is like the aha creative moment. It's that, one of the ways I've gotten into flow on my bike is I almost fall. And, it's usually I'm like, I get on my bike. I don't feel like I'm just, I mountain bike a fair amount. I don't feel like I'm riding well. I'm kind of take the first couple turns. It's awkward. I'm scrubbing speed. I'm either coming in too slow or too fast. And then I'll grab my bars and they'll kind of yank and I'll be, right. I'll almost go over the bars or, something will happen. Right. And then all of a sudden I snap out of this struggle and straight into flow. There's a release part in there, but it's, where you're just like, okay, here it is, I'm in it. So that's one of the ways we can hack into flow with those steps. And when we're in flow, we're actually using less of our brain, right? So dorsal, lateral, prefrontal cortex, and, general is deactivated, right? So we're actually seeing some slowing and disengagement with, say, the default mode network as well. I'm actually going to
show it. And so can I get one more thing?
Totally.
So like the guy jumping off the mountain, that's going to be, and looking at our phone for likes and Facebook, they tell me that's a high dopamine push. So if you kind of upped your dopamine by maybe the risk factor or all this stuff, is that kind of trying to squeeze a little bit of flow out of your everyday life versus jumping off a mountain in a parachute type of thing? Is that like a kick? Is that why people are like looking for a kick? Why they get addicted to dopamine type of things?
Yeah, I mean, we're wired to be addicted. If we look at the pleasure centers in the brain, and if we look at modern day technology, it's designed to addict us through dopamine. And if we're depleting our dopamine in that way, and we're building addictions to it in that way, we're actually training ourselves for exactly what we don't want. So I'll kind of show you, my phone is grayscaled. There's my baby and dog. And then this is, an interesting, so I'm just doing a detox, but if you look at, there's actually that's my home screen. And I'm not getting notifications for texts, emails, no social media on my phone. So I'm just trying to break that habit. And it's a bit of an extreme measure at the moment. And it's not something I imagine I'll do forever, but even just only allowing myself like 1 to 3 tabs open. Because I'll go down these working things where I'm reading 2 different ebooks. I'm listening to a YouTube video. I've got 50 different links that I want to go through for some research. And all of a sudden, I'm not really in the depth of something. And there's part of that chaos actually is part of my process. But right now, I'm just trying to break that habit. Right? So what I'm saying is like, I want more flow in a productive way. I want to be able to get more done. And this is where for, say, an executive or someone who's working, if you can access a flow state, the McKinsey Institute's showing productivity about 500% increase. So if you're buying into that, which is a 10-year amazing study, you're seeing, wow, I can do one day what it used to take me 5 days, or what someone who's stuck in a struggle phase takes 5 days to do.
How about that?
Yeah. And we'll get into some creativity stuff there as well here in a minute.
Good.
So, yeah. So I talked about this, but decreased activity in the default mode network, oversimplification, basically, our anxiety or self-critic, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is also disengaging. And then alpha theta border with gamma bursts. And just the Schumann frequency, we already kind of touched on that, but it's just really, especially as someone who deeply, deeply cares about nature, I do a lot of grounding practices in the kind of Clint Oper way of, if you buy into the negative ion field of the earth and grounding and recharging. And, just this morning was jumping in the lake when it was about, I don't know, the air temperature was about 33 this morning. So, just trying to get in connection to earth, get in connection to the body. So it's, to me, that idea is just elegant. I don't know if there's much there, but certainly it's been written about.
I saw you jump in the water.
Yeah, it was snowing on that video, huh?
How long did you stay in?
About a minute.
A minute?
Yeah, not too long.
Your friend stayed.
That? She's amazing. Yeah, she's been doing it for, man, she's like my inspiration. So, but I think, yeah, it's been an interesting process. This is a newer thing for me. I think, and it's, I've definitely noticed significant changes. So I thought just for funsies, this is my initial, this guy's Huck Patterson or Chuck Patterson. And he was actually my coach on the Big Mountain snowboard team in Squaw Valley when I was a kid. I was genuinely scared of him. He is just an absolute beast. But this is this idea of creativity that comes from flow. Like that's Jaws. And he is doing it on skis. So he was getting pulled in by a jet ski and then surfing Jaws on skis. And there's this idea with flow that you're jumping into, like, how do you train for that? Like, he's an amazing athlete. He's an amazing surfer. He's a professional windsurfer and professional skier and snowboarder. So amazing at all those pieces, but still there's as much transition as you don't know what it feels like to water ski down a big wave until you do it, right? And ultimately it's that gamma burst, right? It's that moment of like, if he's going to eat it, that gamma burst is what gives him like just straight from your brain into your body to be able to react, like at subconscious levels. So I love this. I mean, and Chuck's like a bodybuilder kind of guy. He's huge. I think this is about a 50-foot wave, but the dude's like, he's just a larger than life human. So he kind of makes the wave look smaller than it really is. But yeah. So we'll get into like this, we talked about neurohacking flow, or what we called flow hacking. And there's tons of different ways we can do this. Obviously today we're going to be focusing on the photobiomodulation, but everything plays a part, biofeedback, neuromeditation, breath work, neurofeedback, neuromodulation, psychedelics, whole system balance. So there's tons of different ways. There's way more than just on there, but these are actually really all moving more towards, say, a neuromodulation or deep state type work. But really anything you're doing, like gratitude practices, just walking outside, self-connection, goal setting, all these things are going to really lead to flow hacking. If we look at, say, heart rate variability, that's going to be a really high value flow hack, right? With simple breath works and monitoring of your nervous system, you're going to be able to know, hey, am I too fatigued, not fatigued enough? They have this idea of the sympathetic and parasympathetic branch, which is more complicated than people give it credit for, but also having strength and ability to tolerate both sides of that and having trained yourself to breathe through activated states or frozen states is going to help you get into flow in more situations. So we're really like, these hacks are just strengthening, stabilizing, and increasing your capacity to tolerate your experience. So transcranial photobiomodulation is pretty nifty. I feel like I should just hand it over to you and you should talk about it, or we'll get Marvin on the phone for this part. But it really can impact, as you see here, basically all stages. There's this idea of nitric oxide flushing stress hormones, right? And we can actually do that cheaply by just breathing through our nose. Right? There's other ways, there's different foods that can increase it, but it's really nice to increase cellular level, which is going to affect cellular energy, which will affect all the stages of flow. It's nice to increase that nitric oxide because if we're having stress levels that are chronic, even oxidative stress in our body, I mean, you're not getting into flow like that. Like if you are just burned out, not sleeping, your nutrition sucks, it is going to be really hard to get into a flow state. And that doesn't mean it's not impossible, that it's impossible. Like we can certainly make some pretty simple lifestyle tweaks and get somebody more flow in their life. But by increasing nitric oxide, you can see how valuable that is, especially when most people are getting stuck in struggle. Feeding your mitochondria. I think of my friend Dr. Tom Maltier. He wrote this amazing book called The Whole Life Nutrition Cookbook, or The Elimination Diet. And his whole premise there is just reducing inflammation in your body and eating on a mitochondrial level. So how are you actually fueling your body in like that deep, deep way? And I remember when I was probably 24 or 25 when he wrote that book, and ski patrolling at the time. And he was like, do you want to be a test subject? And I was like, no, man, I'm good. I mean, I was living off like $3 hamburgers and PBR at the time. I'm like, what do you mean no gluten? That's like everything I have has gluten in it. And over time, and as we start to see like, hey, the value of investing to nutrition at a mitochondrial level, or using photobiomodulation to support yourself at that level, is immense, especially if it means that you're getting those 500% increases or 400 productivity, or 400% to 700% increases of creativity, right? So like those are massive boosts. And this is, as you can see, like a tool like photobiomodulation can really come in handy. In training, your brain can be impactful for all stages, right? And, we use the V-Light or V-Light, depending on who you ask. And that comes with we can actually drive it off our Neurofield X3000 now. So we can actually do different frequencies. I've found really good success with the alpha. I've also used the gamma, but we'll get into this idea of an electrical stack in a second. And then increasing O2. I'm a fan of the Wim Hof stuff. It does have its issues, or there's some arguments against it in terms of like capnometry that, CO2 exchange in the body, but I've found great results, personally, and really like the just increasing oxygen, increasing blood flow is huge. And, using something like,
wait a second. So for people who aren't familiar, the Wim Hof method is a cold adaptation. So you can take a cold shower, but he goes to the extremes and jumps in the ice bucket like you did at 30-some degrees. And so what you're saying is that cold, stages, or making your body colder, is having some effect on oxygen. Let us know about that.
He has a hyperventilation technique that I've heard criticized on the AAPB message boards more so than anywhere else, in terms of like, you're basically fully in rapid breathing, hyperventilating, over oxygenating, right? That's that lightheaded feeling, which is ultimately, if you're over breathing, it's still not an efficient breath modality. But if you're using it as, say, a deep state breathing technique, which is the way, we're not, I'm not saying you should belly breathe and breathe in that way 24 hours a day. It's actually really helpful. So
to boost it, that change in chemistry is going to change your chemistry, basically.
100%.
Inducing it. Okay, great.
Yeah. I think there's some claims he makes about DMT and these other things in terms of that I think isn't really substantiated, but that's okay. So, it's like, it's been pretty cool to watch somebody take these ancient practices of breath exercises and make them popular and accessible to a modern day society. So,
so we're talking, just to go back. So we're talking about Wim Hof breathing and not the ice bucket.
Well, the method, to me, there's actually more than just the breathing and ice, right? So if you dive into it, there's different stretches, there's the horse stance, there's push-ups, there's hot, cold, all these different pieces. Good. So when I think of like a simplification of the Wim Hof method, it'd be like, do 3 rounds of the breathing, do some push-ups, and then do cold shower type techniques. And then you can dive in and create what works for you.
So that's like the bad photocopy of a bad photocopy of a one page, then the guy puts on a whole weekend seminar. So I follow you on that. So
yeah.
What I'm saying here is that you found that transcranial photobiomodulation, the effects that it has on the body are the same positive influencers for reaching the flow.
100%. And I really want to pick on that, like getting out of the struggle, right? Getting yourself fueled up, getting yourself focused, getting rid of the stress hormones, right? Like these are all things that we need, whether you buy into the flow stuff or state or not. It's like, we can all agree, like no one wants to live in the struggle phase. Like, and that's like, outside, just like the struggle's real, man. Like, let's like, these devices are like, you have a device that's awesome. You can do different frequencies through, so like if you did a QEEG or, a brain scan, or you just had a strong suspicion of something, you can run different experiments to see how you respond to different types of entrainment at different frequencies and at different times. Yeah, it's I feel like deeply grateful for having access to this technology, and especially in a world that's so fast and so distracting, and we're so deeply trying to just slow down and relax. But there's that like tension of like, well, there's so much to know, there's so much to do. There's like, and then you get this like FOMO stuff, or like, oh man, I'm not as cool as them because, whatever, like their red light setup's bigger than my red light setup. Like, I don't know, right? We can get stuck in that. So and I'm actually switch slides into this electrical stack idea.
Yep.
So it's like any advantage we can give ourselves, right? It's great. Like I personally have several mentors that have taught me meditation or spiritual practices over the years. But we in general as a society, whether from lack of value or from war or from famine, have a lack of elders, especially in a lot of spiritual lineages. And I think anytime you can have something that helps you optimize and also helps you connect is just incredibly valuable.
Did you see what you did right there? You see what you did right there?
What
You talked about wisdom as a assistant while we're talking about electrostack. Isn't that neat?
Isn't that fun?
So go ahead. You've learned these meditation techniques and everything is what you were saying, but you're really talking about kind of someone's got to show you the way one time. Someone maybe aid you like you did, aid these people to get to a certain state and then try to reproduce it by hacking. You know what I mean? By doing something else. Because you're not going to have Billy Bob, telling you breathe like this 24 hours a day. Is that what I see the connection you just made?
Totally. And it actually reminds me of some, and we've mentioned psychedelics, which I am a proponent of in responsible, respectful ways. I know they're not legal, but soon enough. And there was this idea of using flow states to achieve similar outcomes to treating PTSD as MDMA. So UCLA did a study of a group of surfers a group of people with treatment-resistant PTSD. They taught how to surf and get into a flow state. And they were actually able to achieve similar treatment outcomes of using MDMA. So if we just guide and teach how to do it initially, if we build that somatic knowledge, right, then we can actually get there. Because ultimately our bodies have so much wisdom, right? Like we do a lot of somatic psychotherapy in our office, something called somatic experiencing, which is based on Peter Levine's work and Stephen Porges' polyvagal nerve theory. And when you like really give somebody that deep presence or that empathy, like it really shifts them on a cellular level. And what I really like about the electrical stack is that a lot of this language I might even be using might be too much for some people. It pushes them away. But you're like, hey, let me, I'm going to TACS, transcranial alternating current stimulation, parasympathetic activation. I like to do it on the mastoids. We also do it on the brain. Mastoids I'll do with people without a brain map, as long as they don't have a contraindication like, a pacemaker. Man, you're dropping somebody into their social engagement, rest and digest system. Like that feels good. That's different than what most people experience. So all these tools, so that, I like the 10 hertz is what I wrote in here. This is just me specifically, and this is just me with flow. Heart rate variability we talked about a little earlier. I also like SMR, so I do a spindling SMR from 13 to 15 hertz.
How about that? You got to give some of read off some of your abbreviations.
Sensory motor rhythm. So originates from the thalamus, sensory motor strip, 13 to 15 hertz, kind of in that beta 1 range. It's used in treatments of seizures, and it also it's a pretty amazing thing. I think it was like Barry Sturman. I'm probably messing that up, but the neuro nerds will correct me later. They were seeing that in cats there was an increase of SMR right before they'd pounce.
Right.
right? So think calm body, sharp mind. It's a pretty wonderful state. So I'll use that a lot too, especially if I'm trying to get into like some work. We use pulse EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, specifically gamma bursts. I personally run it at T3, T4. It's right basically here and here in our temporal. I like to burst it, right? We're not trying to like just uptrain gamma as a synchronous, like constant state. We want little bursts of it. I talked about Schumann frequency. So these are just some of the tools I use. I'll use them in conjunction, and I'll use them differently. So AVE, audio visual entrainment. These are part.
Entrainment. Ah, you got your glasses. Cool.
Yeah. So, we've got a lot of these. And I like the Schumann frequency. It's like, I've yet to have I've yet to have a bad result with somebody. We've even done it on slack lines. He makes it's somewhere over there. He makes glasses you can see through, so you can do AVE while you're on, say, a slack line or a balance board or something like that. Because you want to, you can use these different meditative states in terms of flow hacking to get yourself relaxed to do the task, or also think technically of how to do the task. So depending on your brain state, you can actually optimize even, say, different meditations or visualization skills. TDCS, direct current stimulation, the DARPA fast learning protocol, and I mean TDCS of all these things, maybe other than heart rate variability, is the least expensive. You can get a decent TDCS direct current device for $150. You put electricity from your right temple, or F10 in the 1020 sites, to your left shoulder. I learned how to juggle in about half an hour. I'm not terribly skilled at throwing or catching. So that's an amazing flow hack. Just it's in, what do you use? Like, shoot us a message of what works for you. And just this note too, one of my mentors is Leslie Sherlin, who's teaching me the biofeedback stuff a little better. And one of the sentiments I think I've really picked up with him and, in our company is this idea that first we stabilize, then we optimize. We're looking at these areas of what's the imbalance, like all this is great, but there might be some other thing happening for you. And we want to always take, some sort of biofeedback-based stress test or assessment, or some sort of QEEG to see, like, what is your neurophysiology, or what is your physiology. So you were talking about, and I got to be mindful of our time here, so we're going to wrap it up. But so this is the back of my truck in us running a NeuroStim. You can see this is all neurofield equipment. We do use other equipment, but for neuromodulation, that is the main thing we use. The Violite is not out here, which in hindsight's a bummer for this picture, but so you can see we're running stuff off a battery pack in the back of the truck. This way we can actually go out and do something like a pre-ride, or I'll do this at the archery range. I shoot a lot of archery, and I'll go out, get myself into a state. I'm able to shoot longer and more effectively. As we know from practicing and training, efficient, we don't just want reps, we want good reps. So here, I gave you guys a couple stats. I just wanted to kind of back those up here. Like, should you care? This, I would say yes. I think this is the direction we're all going. McKinsey Institute, you can see productivity, 500%, creativity, 3 days post, the DARPA fast learning protocol, 490%, and then creative problem solving, 430%. This is actually copied and pasted off the Flow Research Collective, which is Stephen Kotler's new company. And then Jamie Wheel, who is his partner in a lot of the books, like Stealing Fire, now does Flow Genome.
Those guys, that's them?
Yeah, it's them. So that's, anything in closing, or?
Sure. I got a couple questions that we got your stuff, and they'll be able to hit you up. I got a couple of quick ones. Anyway, I enjoyed that. Let me ask you this then. What is this? Your kids, like, you got people out there with addiction problems. I mean, troubled youth are doing something to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so what are you finding? Are you finding it, you're doing it, you're seeing them from a bigger picture. Like, troubled youth, he has trouble. You're going to bring him in there. And in the old days, did you do QEEG, or are you just doing that now? Or
Yeah, I mean, the traditional model of wilderness therapy does not integrate bio or neurofeedback. There's more companies using, I think there's one company now using some neuro and biofeedback. I'm not entirely sure what they mean by those words because some people use it kind of interchangeably. But there's been a strong push, and this is where I would say, when we come to like a physiological standpoint of trauma-informed care in those settings. So we're actually starting to understand the basis of trauma in behavioral dysregulation or the value of stabilizing someone's nervous system and or mental capacity in treatment. So I see this as a really great and quantitative way to do that for somebody.
Well, you threw me off a little bit because you got your MacGyver system out there. So I thought, you would, took it to check their brain, take them out.
Oh, we do. But you got to understand, those were like higher volume wilderness therapy programs. When we run, I'm running 2 next month where, one's with a family of 4 and the other one's with a couple. We're just doing, those are both stabilization type things. We'll run a stress test on our GP8. So we'll do an 8-channel biofeedback assessment. We'll do a full brain scan. We'll do full assessment of what's going on and then create a custom protocol. And oftentimes we're sending people home with devices as well.
That's beautiful.
So,
beautiful.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Tell me about so I guess you're Superman at your own thing.
You Superman at your own thing?
You don't have to be Superman and like jump a building and jump off a mountain, but you could be Superman at your thing, right?
100%, right? And I mean, I think that's the joy of life. Like that's the finding your what, the finding your why, the finding your purpose or calling. This is the thing that like I will stay up all night reading about, or like I deeply, deeply love and am trying to blaze my own path for, but that doesn't make it right or wrong for anyone else, right? We have to ultimately find that for ourselves.
Because you can have just as much, the person that's making the noodles can have just as much enlightenment as the biggest dolly, whatever. But what do you find that if you get in a flow state, let's talk about 2 different things here. You get in a flow state, does people recognize that? What influence does that have on the other or the people that you're socializing with? And the other side, what is being around someone that's got always in the struggle all the time? You know what I mean? How do you feel?
Well, we have something called mirror neurons, right? And we can pick up on somebody else's energy, somebody else's emotions. And I mean, what you're talking about implies an ability to self-connect and check on how you feel, and then also have awareness of how the impact of someone else has on you. And, extremes are always the easiest. Like, we have a very polarized political climate right now, whether you love or hate one of the people, I'm just going to be super vague here, but, immediately you can talk to a friend or, like you walk into, say, a family member at your own house and it's, Fox News at 40, like all the way turned up. And even if you agree with it, it's going to dysregulate you. Even if it's CNN, right? It doesn't matter. We're deeply impacted by what we put into our bodies and what we consume. And that doesn't just mean food, water, and air. It also means the energy of people around us. So yeah, I mean, it's a challenge to know these things. It really does take self-connection and self-awareness, and it does take the ability to ask good questions and listen for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think the quiet of the wilderness helps.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and as I showed you the phone earlier, that's part of that journey for me.
Yep.
It's like not getting sucked in. It's like, hey, that's great. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods, but I'm still in my house with, all these different pieces. So how do I shift the way that I engage in using my tech as a tool and not getting used by my tech, which is where I've been.
Right. And I think that we have to pay attention. That's my model and the many good speakers are going to be touching on this, so that I'm happy that they'll go back and review some of this stuff. And so you're coming up with a dialing program, I know 10 years from now when we do the 2030 brain and transcranial photobiomodulation summit, you're going to be around and we're going to explain to it. I know one thing that we're going to say is, you remember how much 10 years ago we used to look at our phones? I'm sure that's one thing that we're going to say. What do you see it going down the ride? I mean, we talk to people. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, we talk to people. Do you think it's going to be the fact that I'm going to be able to take my phone and dial in the state that I want and put on a device? Or where do you see it coming down the pipe?
Man, if you think back to the Industrial Revolution and where we are now from there, and then you think about how the quantum leaps of our technology and the acceleration of that experience, ooh, it's hard to even fathom where our technology will be in 10 years and what, my fantasy is that we're more deeply connected to self, other, and place, and that we're actually using technology as a tool, that we're in a more choiceful place as humanity, in a more connected place as humanity. Gosh, I have no idea though. I mean, I think it's just, all I do know for sure is we're going to be further along technologically than any of us think. And it's simultaneously not as far as some of us hope, right? But like when we really think of it, it's like, are we going to be living on Mars? Like probably not. Is the technology we have on Earth going to be vastly different? Absolutely. So
I'm with you. And thank you for your participation and you're sharing all your knowledge.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I had a blast. So I hope people get some value. If they made it this far, hopefully they got some value. So